Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the social media webinar today. We're just going to give it 1 or 2 minutes to give people a chance to join the webinar, and then we will begin. Thank you. Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it 1 more minute, just give people a chance to join the webinar, and then we will begin. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, I think we're ready to begin. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the social media webinar. Today we have myself, obviously, my name is Sahil, I'm the Partnerships Manager at Big Give. My colleague Beth has joined us today. She's a Partnerships Executive at the Big Give and also leads on all our social media comms. And we're very grateful to have Teresa Litzer from Lightful joining us today. She's a digital engagement manager at Lightful. They do some fabulous social media work with charities across the country. And yeah, we're really grateful that she's here today to help share her knowledge with all of us. So if we just go on to the next slide. So the webinar will last for 1 hour. It is being recorded. We will put the recording on YouTube and share the slides with you after the webinar is over. The recordings will be able to be found in the webinar, so I'll put in your resources section as well. So the presentation will be around 35 to 45 minutes-ish, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. A bit of housekeeping. For any questions you have for the Q&A session, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel. We will pick them out and then ask Teresa at the end of the webinar your questions. If you would like to introduce yourself to anyone, please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your Zoom panel, and just make sure the two setting is set to everyone. I think, yeah, if we go on to the next slide. And just having a quick reminder to everyone just about how the actual Christmas challenge works. The campaign launches at midday on Tuesday. I think, sorry, it was maybe last year's date. Sorry, the Tuesday 30th of November this year, which is Giving Tuesday, and ends on midday Tuesday 7th of December. So we highly recommend that you log into your account and check that, have a look at the marketing resources that we already have available to you and the previous webinars as well as signing up for the next 2 webinars. A reminder of how the match funding actually works is that the donations are first matched by your pledges. And once the pledges have been used up, then the donations are matched by any champion funds that you may have been awarded until they are used up. So it's really crucial for charities that have been awarded champion funding to make sure that they use up those pledge funds first, so they ensure that they access the champion funding. So I will now hand over to Teresa, who will speak to you about the content of this webinar.
Hello, everyone. Really good to see some of you joining the chat. And as mentioned, feel free to use the Q&A for any questions throughout the session. We wanted to have a session on social media and how to make the most of the channels as part of the Christmas challenge and any upcoming fundraising campaign. So when we're talking about social media and how to make the most of it, there are many different ways to use it. And of course, it depends on your resources, your time, or how much you're using anyway social media up to now. But in terms of ideas on how to make the most of it, the obvious one is to announce your participation so that your audience knows that you are joining the Christmas challenge and how to support you. You can use your channels to build the momentum once the campaign starts, to continue the conversation, share more updates and stories, and keep engaging your supporters and those who might not have heard already about your campaign to still support you. Of course, you can encourage donations and get them into the Big Give page to make sure that they know how to make the process as easy as possible. You can continue the conversation. You start from now before the campaign, you continue the conversation during the campaign, and then you want to make sure that you keep the relationship and you keep developing it for the next years. And of course, the most important thing with social media, you want to tell stories, you want to communicate your work, what you're passionate about, what you want to achieve, and how to make sure that the impact is part of your storytelling. So we're going to talk more about the planning stage, which usually starts at this time of the year, around the month before the Giving Tuesday and the Big Give campaigns, where you want to make sure that your Christmas campaign pretty much is as ready as possible to make the most of the donations. So if you want to start now and just get a little bit organized, it might be good to think of the theme. What do you want to talk about your campaign? Is there like a specific hashtag that you want to use? Or do you want to use the overall hashtag Christmas Challenge 21 this year? And a nice example is from last year. This is from Instagram. It's a really nice way to create images and graphics beforehand to announce your participation, so that your supporters know that you're joining the Christmas challenge and they expect that when they actually see that. It's also a good time now to start thinking of the stories. What do you want to tell as part of your campaign? How are you going to communicate the impact, what you're working on, and why should your supporters really help you? So you can start thinking of the kind of content that you want to share. You don't necessarily need to create all the posts now, but more of an idea of how you want to use different channels to make sure that you are as effective as possible. And as mentioned, we want to make sure that your supporters know as much as possible about your campaign. We want to make sure that they don't just see it on the 1st of December and feel surprised, because the more you talk about something beforehand, the easier it is for someone to process that and feel more prepared to actually donate. So another thing that is very important in terms of getting organized and planning in advance is to make sure you involve your contacts as much as possible and as early as possible. So when we're talking about your contacts and your audience, it could be anyone. It starts with your staff, your volunteers, your board, your trustees, your donors, of course. There might be very engaged donors. There might be the lapsed donors that you haven't really talked for a while. It could be corporate partners. And also something that you don't want to forget, your social media and newsletter followers, subscribers. They might not necessarily be at the stage to donate. They might not be as engaged in all situations, but it could still be a really great case in terms of helping you spread the word and continue with your message. So in terms of making sure you reach all the different contacts, you might want to think, how can I make sure that I reach them in a way that makes sense for them? Not everyone will contribute in your campaign in the same way, but you still want to make sure that you create some sort of template for your messages and you adjust it based on those that you want to reach. As you can imagine, the message would be different in between the staff and the corporate partners, or in between the donors and a new social media follower. So you want to make sure now is the time to get as organized as possible. This really saves you time afterwards, and it really helps maximize the success of the campaign, to work on the messaging and make them feel involved, make them feel part of the campaign. So how can you make them feel involved? As mentioned now, I want to make sure we have some templates. It could be just a Word document. It could be just a paragraph on an email on talking about your campaign, explaining what this includes and how someone can be involved. You want to mention this is how you want to donate, but also this is how you spread the word, so that you give more options. If someone is not ready right now to donate, you still want to make sure that they are part of the campaign one way or another. And then if you think of it, the more people you're involved in advance, and the more they join and share the post on your campaign, the more of the reach you're getting in terms of amplifying your network and reaching new people. So this could be about increasing your donations. It might be about increasing your followers, or maybe continue the conversation about your campaign and possibly explore new partnerships. So when you create these messages, when you're sending to your network, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to share it. So you might have seen from other campaigns in the past, when someone is sharing you just one paragraph and give you a link, it's easier to just copy paste and share it. But if they don't make it easy for you, we all feel that we're very busy to have a think what we want to share. So even if we want to participate, if we don't have something that's very easy, then we might just forget it. So it might be a good idea to create a short link. There are many tools like, for example, bit.ly, and I can share more details about similar shortened links on how to track the links and make it very easy for someone to see that and share it on their social channels or digital channels in general. And ideally, you want to direct them to your website or your Big Give page to make it, again, as easy as possible for them to share your campaign. So speaking of digital channels, and this goes beyond social media, as part of the planning, you want to make sure that you know the channels that you want to use, and there is a reason that you use every different channel. You want to make sure that when you think of your campaign and the overall theme, that everything is connected and they make sense all together. Obviously, you want to involve your website, your Big Give page, your social media channels, the newsletter if you're sending to your subscribers or donors, any groups that you might be part of, could be Facebook group, would be a WhatsApp group, or any sort of community that you could involve your organization. And then exploring, if you want, of course, to create paid ads in terms of promoting, for example, on Facebook. And we'll mention more about that. So how can you involve the different channels? Everything may have a different use, but it's still important to remember how all of them bringing it up together, they can really help you in terms of getting your message across. So the website will help you raise awareness. Someone who might not have visited your website for a while, they can find more information and they can be directed in the next steps. Obviously, the Big Give page is very important in a sense that is the easiest way to increase donations, and it's very direct and it should be very easy for someone to know what to expect. Your social media channels can have different objectives and different uses, can help you to raise awareness. You can still boost the engagement with those who already follow you and continue the conversation, but you can also encourage donations to direct them to the Big Give page. Then you have the newsletter. It's an easy way to update your audience, to know what's coming up, how they can support you, and maybe encourage others to get to sign up to the newsletter, so you increase your audience in that way. If you're part of groups, as we've said about communities, you can encourage participation. You can make it easier for someone to feel more involved in the campaign and find out how to support you. And then in terms of advertising, if you do have the budget, the resources, the time, and it's not necessarily important to do so, it depends on your objectives and how big the campaign will be. It might be a nice way to create some ads before the campaign to raise awareness and make sure you direct to your website and continue the conversations there on the next steps. And something that is also important to remember when we're thinking of different channels. Not every channel would necessarily lead to a direct donation, but this doesn't mean that it's still not important as part of the process to consider that even if not everyone is at the stage to make a donation, it can still be important. So when someone visits your website, for example, they might have visited for the first time, so they might not be ready yet to explore the next steps. But maybe they might be convinced to subscribe to your email and just be updated with your latest news. Then when they receive the link, for example, after a few months about your Christmas campaign, then they have more chances, because they already know what's happening and what your work involves, to proceed to the donation. And of course, as for the donation, we want ideally to continue the relationship and turn them into repeat donors. So this is some sort of funnel in the sense of how to use your digital channels and your content to make sure that you make it easier for someone to start from the first time visitor to actually continue building the relationship with you. And this is also useful for social media, because sometimes there could be someone who hasn't really heard much about you. And even if they're not ready right now to proceed to the donation, you still want to keep them interested enough to keep following your news and updates until they're actually ready to proceed to the donation. So looking more specifically at social media and how to use different channels for different uses. We talked about the overall digital channels, and then of course, looking at social media, all of them have different uses, and it depends on your objectives and how you really want to use your campaign or how to reach your audience. Facebook is usually the most obvious one, and most charities have a Facebook page. It's easy to, not, I wouldn't say easy and nowadays, but it's still the starting point in terms of getting your audience, and especially the friends of the friends and the personal network. But also the challenge with Facebook is the fact that it's so busy means that it's also hard sometimes to reach your audience. And there are many cases with the reach that you don't really get all the people that you have on your page. And it sometimes means that you need to boost your posts to reach your audience. But still, the good thing with Facebook is you still can explore the idea of the community, for example, with Facebook groups. You can use video in terms of being more engaging, and we'll share some more details on how to make the most of each network. With Twitter, it's more of the bite-sized content. It's where the trending hashtags are happening. And of course, with the hashtag Christmas Challenge 21, it's a good use of sharing more shorter posts and tweets. And it's also useful to use the hashtag and keep an eye on what others are doing. LinkedIn is more professional. It's more of a corporate focus, and it might be a good idea also to involve your staff. So I'd say the most important case is both involving your staff and also your partners, your board, your trustees, in terms of having a more corporate focus in the way you're talking. Instagram is all about storytelling and being more engaging and interactive, playing more with stories and trying out different ideas, not necessarily on a very strict kind of way that LinkedIn does. Groups, if you're part of any groups, it's the best way to get your community motivated and engaged and get ready to support your campaign. And it could even be a group in between your team. So it doesn't have to be necessarily an external community, but it still makes the element of belonging and getting someone more involved easier. And then, of course, there are many other platforms, TikTok, Twitch, Pinterest. There are so many other social media channels, and there could be some potential opportunities, but it also might be good to consider that if you're spending too much time on many channels, then you might not have the same results because you're just splitting your attention in different channels. So if you have used any of these before and you feel that your audience is spending the time there, then you might want to use them, but it's not necessarily a case of starting over right now. So looking some more ideas at what we just started in terms of how to use different channels for your campaign. We've mentioned Facebook, and obviously it's the most popular social media platform, but we also see that it's becoming more challenging to reach your audience. It's still a great way to use Facebook on your personal level. So again, involving the team to reach the friends of the friends and other pages that might be following you and want to keep up with your news. And lately it's more about the older demographics, but this doesn't mean that it can be really powerful. So definitely don't underestimate Facebook. And it's a great opportunity to be more personal. Think how, when you are using Facebook, you see the content, what makes sense for you. You don't want to just be very professional, very strict, and the tone of voice that doesn't make sense. You want to focus on the story. You want to be more engaging and try to understand what makes someone connect with your story. It's always a good idea to share more videos. You might want to use live streaming if you want to share updates during your campaign, or if there are any Facebook groups that make sense for your community. And as we mentioned, Facebook ads can also be useful. You might want to boost your posts, make sure that more of your followers are seeing your posts, or you might want to direct people to your website to find out more. And something, speaking of Facebook ads, that is important is that you can't add the Facebook pixel to the Big Give page. So pretty much this means that you could direct them to the Big Give page, but you wouldn't be able to know who visited the page to target them again with future ads. But you can still create Facebook ads leading them to your website so that you have full control. And this way it's easier for someone after the website to visit the Christmas Challenge page. So next one is Twitter. And of course, the limit of 280 characters makes it very specific. And you really have to think how to communicate your message in this limit of 208 characters. So you definitely want to use the hashtag Christmas Challenge 21. It's an easy way for others to see who's joining the campaign. So it might be a nice opportunity to find what other charities are doing. It's also easier for the Big Give team, of course, to keep an eye on the posts and highlight the campaigns. And it's also a nice way to be more engaging, both with your followers and others joining the Christmas Challenge. You might have seen that Twitter works more with things that are engaging and are capturing your attention because things are moving very fast. So you might want to use GIFs, videos. I've seen many examples from last year's Christmas challenge of having videos to share an update of where the organization is in terms of the campaign, how can someone support you, or maybe involving staff, volunteers, others to just share more fun posts and really make it more specific about the campaign. And also something that works really well on Twitter is having 4 images on each post, because it makes it into a small story really in one tweet. You can just present different stages of the campaign or maybe different ideas on how someone can help. And it's a nice way to just see 4 images in just one post. LinkedIn, as we've said, has more of a professional focus, and it's a really nice way to activate your staff and your ambassadors. And what's interesting with LinkedIn is that, of course, you can have a LinkedIn page to share your updates, but it's also really important to go beyond your page, encourage your team to tag your actual page, but use their own channels and reach a wider network. So those who follow you on a personal level on LinkedIn, your personal account, it could be a wider network. So if you do that along with your board, with your trustees, or maybe your corporate partners, then that extends the opportunities to amplify your campaign. Also, the good thing with LinkedIn compared to the other channels is that you don't necessarily need too many posts. If you post, for example, today, and you do get some sort of engagement on your posts, someone could still see your post, let's say 2-3 days after, which is very important. So it's not necessarily a time-consuming network, and you can still get some great results with a more professional focus. Then there's Instagram, which is probably one of the most engaging platforms right now, and it's more about storytelling and being more creative. It obviously has a visual focus. It's all about the images and the videos. And the thing with Instagram is about more of the long-term wins. The fact that you don't always have the option to direct them on the website unless they go on your profile. It means that you won't necessarily get all the direct wins that you could get, for example, with all the other channels, but they can still be great value. You can be more engaging, try different ideas, might be an Instagram takeover. You might want to try Instagram stories. And the fact that it is the most engaging channel, it means that more people would actually see that. So think how you can involve different team members or volunteers, someone who might actually be good at social, or there might be some sort of influencer in your local community. Someone who knows how to use Instagram in a sense that continue the conversation about your campaign to support you, and maybe get more followers so that you build the community that you want for the future, as we've said. It's not just about this campaign. If you can get them engaged enough to continue following you and engaging with you, then that means that you also have more opportunities for the future. And then you might be thinking, we've talked about so many different channels that, of course, it's time consuming to create content for all channels and have the time to actually do everything. But what's useful to remember with social media is that you don't necessarily need to create new content for all channels. You can definitely repurpose the content and just adjust it to make sure that it makes sense based on how each platform works. For example, you might have a video of 2 minutes and you can share that on Facebook, but then you might want to cut it down really to 20 seconds and share that on LinkedIn. Or you might want to have a screenshot and turn that into a graphic and share that on LinkedIn. So this is just to think, how can I create, let's say, 5 posts, 5 themes, and then narrow it down and create different posts out of these opportunities. You don't necessarily need to spend too much time. You just want to make sure that all your efforts are really focused on where your audience really spends the most of the time. If you see that your engagement up to now was on Facebook, then that's where you need to spend more time, because it means that you already have an engaged community there. And you don't necessarily need to spend time on too many channels, because that will just divert your attention. So I'd say focus on 2, maximum 3 of them, the ones that make more sense, or even just 1, depending on where you are. And try to talk to your audience the way you used to in the past, the way that your posts were engaging up to now. Something that's also really interesting with social media, and we've seen that even more the last year or so, is the idea of micro donations and how you can really play with your messaging with that. So for example, in that campaign, the idea of doubling the impact is very important. and you can include your messaging as part of your campaign. So when you say to someone that even £5 can really make a difference because you're going to help us in this specific way, then you're making it very tangible for someone, and they feel that even if they spend £5 and you communicate that we're actually receiving 10, they still feel that they're contributing towards your cause. So don't be afraid to encourage small donations. And if someone is not really at the stage to donate more, you still want to encourage that. You still want to make sure that they don't feel bad that they can't commit to more than £1, £2, £3, £5, and that still is very welcome and very important. And also, it might be just a start for you. You might want to cultivate a donor relationship and get them to commit even more in future campaigns. So think how, when you create posts for social media, how you can really make the most of every single donation and every single donor. So we talked about ideas in terms of the planning and how to make sure you are organized as much as possible until the campaign. Then during the campaign, of course, it's useful to be organized in advance. What do you want to share? How many updates do you want to share? Do you want to keep them up to date about the progress? How often do you want to post? Or how to encourage them when you're reaching your target to continue supporting you and even spreading the word about the campaign if they have already donated. So then you're done with the campaign. Hopefully you've reached your targets and exceeded them. Then we're looking at the next steps, because it's also really important to focus on what you want to do right after the campaign. This could be the day after, the week after, what makes sense for you really in terms of the next steps. The most important step, you want to thank your donors and your supporters, share an update, what happened in the campaign, how much did you raise, and what are you going to do with that? It's more of a reminder, and it's a nice way for the donors and even the social media followers who supported you to feel involved. You want to definitely communicate the impact on how every single donation matters, what was the end result, and what are you going to do next. And then you want to also look at your own results. How do you measure the success? Going beyond the actual amount raised, what else did you manage to achieve? Were there any wins in terms of engagement, followers, subscribers? Were there any lessons on things that you could improve? It's definitely useful, even if it's a month after or the start of next year, to look back at the campaign, see what worked well and what you can also improve. And also something to remember is that at the end of the campaign, you don't want to lose the relationships, whether it's someone that has been following you for years or someone who's just brand new. You want to think of different ways to focus on engagement. You don't necessarily want to make an ask, let's say, a month after. So if you're not asking for a donation again next month, how can you keep them engaged? How can you tell an engaging story? How can you make sure that they're still interested in your own digital channels? I think of ways to see that as a journey. It's not just about the campaign, which is very important, of course. You also want to make sure, ideally, someone is interested enough to continue following you and keeping track of all your updates. And just some takeaways from everything we've discussed now in terms of getting ready with your social media channels for your campaign. Planning is very important, and it doesn't have to take endless hours. It's more about knowing what you want to talk about, what kind of themes you want to have. Are there any images or videos that you want to use? And how many updates do you want to share during your campaign? Then it's definitely useful to involve your staff, volunteers, board, partners as early as possible. Make it very easy for them to join the campaign. Ideally, create a paragraph or even one sentence where you just talk about the campaign and get them to share it on their own networks and give them the link to the page. You definitely make sure you work on some images, and luckily there are many tools like Canva, for example, that they really help you have a consistency without being a designer, and adjust them on different channels and how you want to use them. Think of your messaging, how you want to talk about doubling the impact and the match, and how can you encourage the micro donations to communicate that every single donation matters and that everything really is appreciated from all your followers. And then, as we mentioned, make sure you use social media to continue engaging with your donors and your supporters and have them more prepared for your next campaigns. have them to continue the relationship with you during your digital channels and track any wins in between one campaign and the other. And time for Q&A. I haven't looked at the chat yet, so I'd love to hear more on what you're planning for Big Give, any questions you might have.
Great, that was a great presentation, Teresa. Thank you
Thanks,
very
Beth.
much. We have a few questions here. So we have one from Sarah, and she asks, how many times a day would you advise sharing posts on social media? For example, would you do more posts on Giving Tuesday, for example?
Really good question. I think it really depends. It depends on how many times you were posting up to now. Usually we've seen in the campaigns that are more intense, like Big Give or Giving Tuesday, it's totally fine to increase the posts. So let's say if you were posting on Facebook up to now 3 times a week, it's totally fine to post 5 times a week, or during Giving Tuesday, which is a very specific day, you might want to post 2-3 times, but it really depends on the content you have. If you feel that you don't have more to say on the day, it's totally fine. But if you want to kind of like split the story into many different posts, then as long as they're still engaging and interesting to your donors or sharing the progress about your campaign, then you can definitely increase the posts.
Thanks. And there was one slide where you talked about the campaign link, and Annabelle asks, do you advise sending people directly to their charity website and then directing them to the Big Give page, or sending them directly to the Big Give page?
I think it depends. As part of the campaign, it's probably better to direct them to the Big Give page in a sense that you're making it easier for them. And I'm sure Beth and Shahil, you might have seen that in the past. The easier you make it for someone to go into the donation, then the best the results you get. But I think it's also good in some posts to direct them to your website so that they get more context. They might want to find out more about you, about your work, and get more of the bigger picture if they're not following you closely up to now.
And there was another question from Sarah, and she said, would you tag those who have pledged? I might answer this one, but I think it really just depends on who your pledges are and if they want their support publicised or not. I think it'd be great to tag them in your posts, especially in the thank you post that Teresa said after the campaign, just to keep them engaged. But of course, that depends whether your pledges would like to be publicised or not. So that's largely up to you. We have a question from John about what is the approx cost of Facebook advertising, and what about Google Ads?
Well, Facebook advertising is probably the most cost-effective way to create ads on digital channels, but still it depends on if you want to use the budget. For example, if many small charities that we've worked, we would just recommend, let's say, go with £50. You can still get some great results and engage your audience. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a necessity. It's more of an additional thing to have. If you do have, even, as I've said, like £50, it can still be an addition in terms of engaging more of your audience. But it's definitely not an expensive way to advertise. And Google Ads, they're also a good option, but they're also more about the long term compared to Facebook. So Google Ads, they are happening on Google, which means that it's when someone is Googling for an answer, that they will find at the top of it the results of it. So you want to think, is that making sense for a very time-sensitive campaign? That might be more about a long-term campaign. Could be an overall donation, but not necessarily on the time to make sure if it's just 1 week or before that week, that you would get a lot of results on that.
And just to add on the Google Ads is that I think they offer a program where they match you up with volunteers to help you with your Google Ads grants. So that's worth signing up for as well.
Yeah, and then give a grant, right?
Yeah, it's about £7,000, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely good to explore for sure.
And I can just see a follow-up question from Linda has just come in here. She says, do you have any advice on budgeting for Facebook or Instagram paid ads versus paying to boost some direct posts instead?
The budgeting, again, it's very subjective. And if you play around with Facebook, you can see there is an estimate based on your audience and what you want to achieve. I always find it really useful because one page to another, they might have a different estimate about the budget and the audience. But in general, the easiest way is to boost your post if you want to reach your audience, for example, or not go into a very detailed target audience is a simple way to understand Facebook ads. But if you want to get into more details in order to reach a more specific audience, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, you might want to go through the business manager to explore that.
And do you think boosting posts can affect the organic reach of other posts that you haven't boosted before? I'm not sure if you have any.
I think that's a good question. If you post, let's say, 2 posts at the same time or the same day, then definitely the one that is boosted is getting more of a favorite from Facebook. But if you posted something, let's say, the day before, that it doesn't necessarily affect it. It's more about posting something almost at the same time. It's like the algorithm is picking the one that was boosted, and they prefer to show that to your followers.
Great. We have a question from Megan. Do you have any insights on good benchmarks to aim for in terms of click-through rates on different platforms, or do any particular platforms seem to perform better for encouraging donations / conversions?
There was a study that I've seen quite recently, and I can share the link later on with Shahil so that we share that. It was about the engagement rate for charities for different channels, so that's very useful. I think the results were focusing more, I think the winner was Facebook in that case, specifically for charities. It wasn't directly about donations, but it meant that it's more engaging, so more people are just interacting with your posts. So it was really interesting to see that. And Instagram is also on the rise, so that was also interesting to see from one year to another how the channels are really changing.
Do you think that may have also been affected by Facebook, because on Facebook they have the donate function?
Yeah, I think so. I think that comes from the fact that there is the fundraising element on Facebook, which is making it easier for someone to focus more of your fundraising input there.
Sahil, do you have any questions that you wanted to pick out?
Yeah, sorry, just bringing it up. Is it, sorry, I had, with a small charity with like small social media teams, is it better to choose 1 or 2 social media platforms to focus on? And a follow-up question to this is that, is it important to understand how, not obviously in depth, but have a basic understanding of how each social media algorithm works? So from what I understand, LinkedIn is that if you start posting out of the blue, it's not really going to have much reach where they focus on engagement, whereas Twitter is like anyone following you will see anything you post.
I think it's a really good point. In that sense, yeah, for sure, Twitter is easier. If you haven't created a page in the past, let's say on Twitter or LinkedIn, Twitter has more chances because you just use a hashtag that is trending, like Christmas Challenge 21 or Giving Tuesday. So many people are posting about that, so you have more opportunities to amplify your reach. But I think it's probably better to focus on the channels that are already working for you, because as we've just said, if it's brand new, then you need more time to build that, get the followers, get the engagement. So if you're active on one channel, then that's where you want to spend more time. So it's probably better to aim for 1 or 2 channels and spend your energy there, rather than just split the focus, let's say 5 minutes on each channel.
And do you recommend any particular scheduling tools if a charity hasn't got one already?
I think it depends on pretty much your needs. For example, you might start on Facebook where it has a direct scheduling option, or if you want a tool that is just free, which means that there are more limited options, or if you have a little bit of budget, there are other tools that you can just explore more. I have to mention, obviously, that Lightful has a tool, a social media tool. So the free option is pick 2 channels from Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So if you still want something that doesn't involve any cost, then there are definitely a couple of tools to try out.
I suppose just to follow up on that, the Big Give, we use Buffer and they have a discount code for charities. And I believe Canva Pro has a content planner now, and Canva Pro is actually free for nonprofits. So that's something to check out as well. But
yeah, definitely
keep in mind that that's only for kind of Canva templates.
I have a question about Instagram, because obviously you can't put in like links in your posts. So do you have best practices about how to link to like outside third-party pages or your campaign pages on LinkedIn?
That's the tricky thing with Instagram, and they're trying to work on that. I think now the idea of the fundraising sticker, which is still not available to everyone, it means that it's going towards the right direction, but it's not there, which is why it's not the channel to think when you want a direct conversion necessarily. But the fact that it is the most engaging platform and more people are spending time there, it means that even if you talk about your campaign and you get the engagement, if someone is interested, they would click on your link on your profile because you're used to that now, and you click on the next steps.
I can see a question just come in from Anne, or the Anne Frank Trash, I say. She said, we have 3 active channels. Is it okay to ignore some channels and just focus on 1 or 2?
Yeah, it's definitely better to focus on 1 or 2. But if they're all active and you feel that there are differences in the audience, then it might be good to keep all 3 of them. It depends on your time and how you want to spend the focus of your campaign.
So how far in advance do charities start to plan or schedule in their social media posts for the campaign?
Good question. I've heard many different cases. The most organized ones, I was very surprised, they start like 2 months in advance, which is not the default, but it's more about starting building the conversation and gradually move towards the campaign. I think you usually start the week or 10 days before with the actual posts that you're going live. So you say, save the date, this is happening, this is what we're doing this year. And then you schedule more posts closer to the campaign. So you think of it as a timeline. And of course, you create more posts when the campaign starts.
Yeah, and kind of just to go off that, the Big Give do provide resources as well. We have a social media brief that's available in the charity portal, has some general Canva editable templates or just the Big Give logos, some template social media posts, examples, just things to kind of get you started. More recently, we added a key messages doc. So in there, you'll see the key message of 1 donation, twice impact, and some things you may want to include in your post as well. So really, I think organize as much as you can now, and then the less you have to do during the campaign.
I think these resources really help, and it's a great way to get started. So you can look at all the resources and think, what makes sense for my organization? How can I adjust these key messages to involve them in my campaign? So the more you work on them, as you said, the easier it becomes afterwards.
I have 2 questions here that have just come in. I'll ask the first one from Sarah Lockwell, which is, I work with vulnerable people, so it's hard to get videos, and videos of staff talking about the people they work with would be just as engaging. We've actually covered a bit of this in another webinar, is that if you can't have sort of your service users on camera, it's always great to still get them involved by sort of setting up a steering group, having them involved so they can give you advice on what sort of messaging they want about their experiences. But yeah, Teresa, do you have any further advice about that?
Yeah, we've had some cases, especially with kind of like sensitive storytelling and sensitive target audiences, that of course you can't always have videos or getting the faces out there. So you might want to have a story as a quote, just an image, and keep it anonymous, or get some sort of ideas and themes, as you've said, so that you get the support without necessarily involving them directly.
And one from John Fisher was, just to clarify, that the Canva Pro is free for non-profits. Or is it a discount?
No, I believe it is free. You'll have to double check that. But yeah, I believe it is free, and you can just contact them.
You might want to apply.
Then yeah, you can apply to get it free. One question, do you think it's best to put the hashtags in the post itself or in comments? I know some charities have multiple hashtags.
I've seen this about Instagram, when there is a conversation, it's like, should I use the comments or the actual post to involve the hashtags? And there was a research that actually said that there isn't any difference. I think Instagram was recommended having that on the actual post, but they said that it doesn't really make a difference. so it's not a big case. But if it's like a more specific case like Twitter, you want to be careful about the number of characters, so you might want to use the one that make more sense for you.
Do you think there's any issues with charities using the same sort of post templates or the same messaging on different social media channels, like using the actual same posts themselves, or would you recommend tailoring it more?
I think it's not necessarily too bad. And we've said to many small charities that at the end of the day, if you don't have time, it's fine. That if you have the time, even 5 minutes to say, I'm going to change it a little bit, because maybe what someone sees on LinkedIn, you don't necessarily want the same tone of voice with Facebook. So you can still have a starting point, but see what would make more sense to be more engaging from one channel to another. So maybe like small tweaks.
A question just came in from Olivia. Does TikTok work for the big give, or do you have any examples of that? Or just using TikTok in general for promoting campaigns?
To be honest, TikTok, I haven't seen much examples or any examples from like last year's campaign about charities using TikTok, and it's not a social media channel that I use, so I wouldn't have much expertise on that. I don't know if Teresa, if like people are using TikTok, and also like if you have any examples of that, or linking to like charities that have used it to link to their like fundraisers.
I've seen some examples. It's still early stage, specifically in the non-profit sector, but there are some interesting examples, especially about larger organizations, or if you have an influencer, or it doesn't have to be an influencer, someone who just understands TikTok. It could be just a volunteer. So this always gives you a starting point, because I'm also on the same page. I'm still trying to understand on the professional setting how to use TikTok. So I think it's probably better to jump on board if you feel that there is someone who could really help you create the right content. It doesn't necessarily need too much time. It's more about creating the content that would work well.
And I guess TikTok, it's more about sort of just telling your charity story rather than probably driving donations or using that as like a fundraising tool in that sense, but more the awareness of the charity.
Or it could be about encouraging your own supporters to create some sort of video that makes sense with your campaign.
I think it could particularly work if you have like a challenge, something you're doing with your supporters, and then that's kind of repeated throughout different TikToks, and so your supporters get involved that way. Something to think about there. What are your top 3 tips, would you say, to take away from this?
Good question. Definitely what we both agreed on: plan as much as you can. Have a think, use all the resources right now to create the narrative for your content, the channels that you want to use, and maybe think what you want to achieve. So set some targets as a starting point. You might want to raise this amount of money ideally, or ideally also increase the followers or the engagement. So have some starting points in order to go back afterwards and see whether you've reached that or what can you improve in the future. And explore how you can involve your team and your broader network as much as possible. Create some templates for them, make it easier, maybe share the images, and they could really help your campaign go like in a wider audience.
I think the template one is always a great idea. We've seen always from successful charities that they created those sort of social media packs for supporters, volunteers, everyone to use. So it's just makes it so much easier to share your campaign.
Yeah, 100%.
We have a question from Adele, which was about how do you go about creating your own hashtag instead of using Christmas Challenge 21, or you recommend best to use? For that, firstly, we'd say we'd really encourage charities to use the Christmas Challenge hashtag where possible, just because the more charities, the more people that are using that hashtag, the higher that the campaign trends on social media. So we greatly encourage charities to use it because collectively it sort of heightens the sort of awareness of the campaign and puts it in a more prominent spotlight. I'll just quickly put my point of view is that, we also charities can use their own hashtag from Speak League, who won the best social media campaign last year. They had a social media sort of campaign where they were encouraging sort of people to do sort of challenges, and they used the hashtag Match It. So I guess it's thinking about what your campaign is, what you're raising funds for, and then I guess you just have to maybe bring together different parts of your team and maybe even like get the opinion of supporters about what they think would be work in the messaging. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Teresa or Beth.
No, I definitely agree on that. It might be good. It's not a necessity, but I think it's making it easier in terms of having a brand in your campaign is the extension of your brand.
Yeah, and I suppose just having, you don't have to have just one hashtag. You could have hashtag Christmas Challenge 21 along with the hashtag that's more relevant to your campaign. Yeah, it's really up to you.
And in terms of video, quick bit of advice for anyone that didn't join the webinar on Wednesday is, and this follows on from what Teresa said about sort of repurposing content, is that content that you create for the Christmas challenge could be used for like long-term, like for campaigns in the long term. So don't think about how you may want to use that, like anything you're creating in the long term, and then that may sort of provide better return on investment on what you're spending money on. Could we pretty much assume everyone only checks Twitter on their phone? Does it affect like the type of content you're putting out on Twitter versus like Facebook?
Really good question. I think that's something important to consider for all social networks nowadays, that we spend more time on our phones and we want to make sure that, for example, you don't create an image that looks good on desktop, but the font is actually very small. You want to see that as a test on your phone to make sure that it's easy to spot it and grab your attention. So I think more and more we need to consider how does the content look on our mobile phones, especially like Instagram, for example. You check it on your phone. So you might want to increase the font size or make it more engaging, or that's why videos also work well.
And do you have any sort of thoughts on the messaging in terms of like positive messaging versus sort of what we would say, I wouldn't say negative messaging, but sort of those stories which are really like very emotional versus positive? And do you have any research or any like sort of opinions on what?
There was a report that I was reading towards it was the start of the pandemic, and it was saying that actually the campaigns that started the first months, the ones that worked well, were the most hopeful and inspiring ones, because having a campaign that just acknowledges a negative situation, or you're just tapping into the sad element, it is expected, and it's the case in many times, especially when you present a challenging situation of all kinds. But if you're trying to connect with someone and make them feel more inspired, more hopeful, then this can actually increase the chances of a donation.
I'm not sure if we have any more questions.
Yeah, I can't see any further questions. Just having a quick look now. I think, yeah, that's it. But yeah, if anyone does have any further questions, do obviously contact us, hello@thebiggive.org.uk. We'd be happy to help. As mentioned, this webinar has been recorded, so we will be putting on YouTube. We will share the links in the webinar article available in your campaign dashboard along with the slides. But with that in mind, I just want to say thank you to Teresa for joining us today. It's been a really great webinar. Really
welcome. Good to join.
Thank you everyone for joining us today as well. I hope you've got a lot out of this webinar, and thank you for all your questions. And we hope you all have a lovely weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.